I do just as much writing, I think, when I'm not sitting at my desk.
That's Suzanne Roberts. That's this week's guest, episode 267 of the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, somehow in its 9th year. The show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. That's right. That's what we do here. Yes, so Suzanne Roberts is a travel writer. She's at Suzanne Roberts 28 number on Instagram. And she was a sheer joy to talk to. It was like CNF Pod search engine optimization spewing out of her mouth listening to her talk. She was just checking off so many of the boxes I love to talk about. And of course, writing, nonfiction memoir, community, dealing with jealousy, writing in community, dealing with rejections, etc., etc. But first, support for the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by West Virginia Wesleyan College's low residency MFA in creative writing. Now in its 10th year, this affordable program boasts a low student-to-faculty ratio and a strong sense of community. Recent CNF faculty include Randon Billings-Noble, Jeremy Jones, and CNF Pod alum Sarah Einstein. There's also fiction and poetry tracks. Recent faculty there include Ashley Bryant Phillips and Jacinda Townsend, as well as Diane Gilliam and Savannah Sipple. No matter your discipline, if you're looking to up your craft or maybe learn a new one, consider West Virginia Wesleyan, right in the heart of Appalachia. Visit mfa.wvwc.edu for more information and dates of enrollment. And promotional support is also brought to you by Hippo Camp 2021. Oh my goodness, it is right around the corner. It's back in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Registration's still open. It's a conference for us CNFers, us creative nonfiction writers. Marion Winnick will be this year's keynote speaker. We've got a debut CNF author panel featuring Lily Danziger, Greg Mania, Carol Smith, and Janine Willette. August 13th through the 15th. You dig? Use the promo code CNFPOD21 to get $50 off your registration fee. So Suzanne Roberts, she's a travel writer, memoirist, and poet. I'm pulling some things off the old website, SuzanneRoberts.net. Her books include the 2012 National Outdoor Book Award winning Almost Somewhere, 28 Days on the John Muir Trail. Muir, Bison Books, whatever. You know the trail, you know the guy. The award-winning memoir and travel essays, Bad Tourist, Misadventures in Love and Travel. That's the one we really talk about on this show, University of Nebraska. And a collection of lyrical essays, Animal Bodies, On Death, Desire, and Other Difficulties. That's forthcoming. University of Nebraska Press 2022. And 4 collections of poetry. All great stuff, right? So we talk about early wins, how not to sound like a douchebag when you talk about traveling. That was cool. So show notes and other ways to support the podcast are at brendanomeara.com. Hey, if you hate ad reads, you know I keep them pretty minimal, and I keep them germane, and I only take the ones on that I think are of value to you. But that said, if you're tired of those, consider becoming a patron at Patreon. That way I can maybe make the show 100% listener supported. Patreon.com/CNFpod. Window shop. Gets you access to audio magazine, every tier, and then other tiers get you transcripts and other stuff. Think about it. Still keeping this pretty lean here in the introductions. Don't want to waste your time. I might consider recording my, quote, parting shots, unquote, and save those for the Patreon crowd. That way, if you really want to dig that shiz, you can check it out and not be force-fed it. That said, I always kept the old parting shots at the end of the show. Not always, but more recently. And anyway, this lean opening is starting to get bloated. So here's Suzanne Roberts. As we get, rocking and rolling here, it might what are you up to these days? What are you putting in the tank? What are you reading, watching? What's going in?
Oh my gosh, so many things are going in. So this year I decided to do a New Year's resolution that I might actually be able to accomplish, which was to read a book a week. So
Nice.
yeah. So I've read some really great books lately. I loved, like I said, I loved Lily Danziger's Negative Space. I read Blow Your House Down by Gina Frangello. I read Home Baked by Alia Volz. So I've been reading a lot of memoir and essay collections, and I think that's because that's the genre I'm still working in at the moment. And so every book I read just gives me so much inspiration.
What is it you like about the essay collection as a piece of work?
Well, I really like that I can read one essay and then set it down and come back, and I don't feel like I have to remember where I am in the story. So that I like. I like being able to skip around in essay collections. I know a lot of people don't like to do that. I've heard, in fact, with my own essay collection, Bad Tourist, some readers were a little bit unhappy that my book isn't in chronological order. But I did that on purpose, and I wanted people to be able to skip around if they so chose. And I also just love the essay as a form. I've always been attracted to the personal essay, and I'm really happy that it seems like the marketplace is now more open. In current times, you'd hear for so long, oh, you can't get a book of essays published, but I just don't think that's true anymore.
Yeah, I really like the essay collection for a lot of the reasons you're saying as well, because to me it strikes me as like a music album where you can listen to it beginning to end, track 1 to track 10 or whatever, or you can just listen to whatever songs you want, or you can put it on shuffle and read things out of order or listen to things out of order. And that's what I've really come to find, where whether it be Melissa Falavino's Tomboyland or anything Elena Passarello does, or even what you do with Bad Tourist, that you can hop around or read it beginning to end, and it doesn't feel like you're too unstuck in time within the covers of the book. Like you can travel wherever you want within the book.
Yeah, I love that metaphor with the music track, and I also think too that every book and every memoir, maybe not every book, but many books have sort of their slow spots, or their spots where you get kind of like, oh, I'm not so, tracking so well on this. You can stop reading an essay and just start reading the next one if you don't like that one. So I like that too.
Nice. And so at what point do you get the writing bug in your life?
What do you mean?
Oh, just at what point do you want to lean in and become a writer?
Oh, well, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I quit my full-time teaching job 3 years ago to do just that, to lean in and be a writer full-time. As a result, my husband and I are going to be traveling in our van this summer and renting our house out so that we can afford our mortgage. But it's just, that's what I do, and I don't do it every single day. Like, I'm not one of those writers who's super disciplined, like, Stephen King in his memoir on writing, right? He says, he sits at his desk like 364 days a year, whatever. I don't do that. I mean, the last week, the weather here has been beautiful. I've been mountain biking and hiking and paddleboarding, but who's to say that when I'm not writing then too. I think walking for me is a time of thinking about sentences and thinking about images. And I do just as much writing, I think, when I'm not sitting at my desk. So I think I'm always leaning in. And when I really want to finish a project or work on something difficult, I go away. So I'll go away for a month by myself and write. And I haven't done that since COVID. I mean, I went away for a couple weekends and, a week here and there. But when I really want to finish something, I go away for a month.
Can you point to any particular, writer or a book or collection that is one of those mentor texts that sort of turned the world from black and white into color for you?
Probably the book that gave me permission to write my own stories was many, many years ago, in the 1990s. I read Cowboys Are My Weakness by Pam Houston. And I didn't think that writing about nature and hiking and my fears and my bad relationships and my dog were subjects sort of worthy of literature. I'd grown up reading all the, dead white men. And I thought, well, these stories are not worthy of literature. And then I read Pam Houston. My creative writing professor gave me her book, and it was like, it cracked everything open for me. It was the book that told me that women's stories are valid and interesting and important. And that to me was one of the books that was really instrumental in me becoming a writer.
Can you point to like an early win in your writing life that put enough fuel in the tank that made you feel like you're not completely delusional in this pursuit?
Well, it's so funny. And I think I want to address this because I think people who listen to your podcast probably all feel, not all, but many feel like imposters. No matter how many books you publish or awards you win, you just always have that little like, oh, you're really an imposter, or, I'll have a book accepted for publication, and then the voice will come in, the editor didn't really read it. Like, they're going to find you out that it's really no good. And so every win, I think, helps. And my early win was in the 4th grade. I knew I wanted to be a writer from the time I could write. Even actually before I could write, I used to make little books. I'd tell my mom the story and draw the pictures, and she'd write the words for me. And my dad was a writer. So that was open to me, right? A lot of children who grow up and don't think writing is a profession. I had the good fortune of living with a writer. And so I loved writing stories. And in the 4th grade, I entered a mystery writing contest. It was like a short story contest. And I loved mystery. I loved Edgar Allan Poe. I loved, horror. I ended up getting my PhD in Gothic literature, so there is a direct line there. But I won the greatest mystery writer contest. And it was the first time a 6th grader hadn't won and a 4th grader won.
Nice.
Yeah, and I had to read my story to the assembly, to the entire school. And of course, I read it so fast that nobody knew what was happening, right? And that was a huge win for me. That told me that I could tell a story that was worth someone hearing. And that was my big win, was 4th grade.
I love hearing that. That's so, it's so formative to get those kind of things early on, because it's something writing at that age, and even through middle school and high school. Like, usually those are when there's no, you're not really censoring yourself. You're not thinking about it. You're just doing it out of sheer love. And it's so great to hear you sort of develop that muscle and a sense of unbridledness at a young age, which clearly has translated into your more professional writing career, I imagine.
Yeah. And, if the joy isn't in sitting down and doing it, or getting a new essay, or writing a book, finishing a book, I mean, that is a great accomplishment. Whether or not it's ever published doesn't matter. You did your part. And so I just tell myself that the writing, the figuring out that perfect metaphor, or the perfect image, or the perfect sentence, that is where I have to find the joy. Because the world says yes sometimes, and the world has said yes to me in a lot of different ways, and I'm really grateful for that. But the world has said no to me too, and will continue to do so. And I know that, and I cannot base my happiness as a writer on those outside forces. Nobody can, or you won't do it, or it's not worth doing.
Exactly. So in the face of the innumerable and often punishing no's in the world, how do you endure in the face of those?
Well, I'm trying to think about the specifics that you might mean. Can you tell me more specifically, like what you might mean?
Well, the great subjectivity of it all is naturally going to put more rejection on your plate. And there's always going to be people just telling you, no, this isn't right. And it's going to be your own confidence and your own assuredness and your own, at some point, a sort of delusional self-belief in yourself that they are wrong and you are right. And it's just a matter of it's a matter of just endurance and perseverance. And some people can weather that and other people can't. And I wonder how you have managed to build that muscle up, that when you get that no, you realize that it's just one step closer to yes.
Well, I think there are a couple things. The first thing is that I've read a lot of literature by people who sort of never made it until after they were dead, right? So, I have a chapter in my dissertation on Emily Dickinson. She had 7 poems published in her lifetime, right? And now she's like considered the mother of American poetry. So I've read, so many writers who were rejected, criticized, and I know that they were just ahead of their time and that they were doing exactly what they should have been doing. And so sort of philosophically, I understand that. But in practice, I have developed a few key fun ways to deal with rejection. And one is that for years, I put together a rejection club. And so what we would do is there'd be like 5 writers in this rejection club. And we would keep track of all of our rejections for a year and actually send them, the ones that come through Submittable or whatever, we would forward them to each other. And then everybody would say, oh, what bad taste they have. And, kind of make each other feel good. And whoever got the most rejections got free dinner paid for at AWP, the annual conference, one night. And more often than not, I won. I would always shoot for 100 rejections in a year. And I mostly got 100 rejections in a year.
That's great. My friend Lisa Romeo, she challenges people to shoot for 100 rejections in a year, which isn't to say ship crap. It just means ship stuff. And, if you aim for that many submissions, you're bound to get something. It's just the sheer numbers of it all. But how many people maybe submit 3 to 5 things a year and hope to get published when it really what it is going to take is 50 to 100 to get anthologized, to get to fill in the blank. It truly is a numbers game, and you just have to have that kind of endurance. And it's great that you put a little friendly competition into seeing who can put the most work out there.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. And it builds community, right? So we all know what we're doing and we're cheering each other on. And we also do send our successes too, right? Like, oh, I got 40 rejections, whatever this month, but I got 2 acceptances. And you're right. I think when I've kept track, I think that my acceptance rate is between 10 and 20%, which is good. That's like really good. So if I send out 100 things, I'll get 10 things published in a year. And so, I tell my students, it's like, okay, you want to publish 10 things this year? You're not even going to come close unless you send 100 things out.
It's so important to hear that because, and I've talked about this in terms of in baseball terms in terms of a batting average, and that baseball is truly a game of failure. Like if you fail 70% of the time, you're a Hall of Famer, and everyone accepts that as true. And it's like, great, I'm batting 300. I'm an all-star, but we don't know the batting average for submitting our work to places, so we don't know what's success and what's a failure. And when you hear someone like yourself and you're telling your students that if you're batting 100, you're doing pretty damn good.
Oh yeah, a 30% would be amazing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I mean, your 70% rejection would be amazing. So I love that way of looking at it.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like whatever that Hall of Fame number is, just in baseball, we know it's that. And, so in writing, if we can agree that, maybe if you're batting, 5 to 10%, it's like, okay, you're doing pretty okay for yourself. Whether you're making a ton of money or not, who cares? But if you're landing enough pieces, that means you're putting it out there enough. And like, that's a good batting average. And the more we can tell people out there and tell the listeners that, if you're submitting 100 things and you're getting 5 to 10 published, like you're doing all right. You're getting on base.
Yeah, that's really good.
Tell me a little bit about the Wordy Girls.
Oh, I love the Wordy Girls. I'm seeing them tonight, actually.
Nice.
So the Wordy Girls is the name of my writing group. Anyone who's interested in my ideas about how to set up the perfect writing group, I actually wrote about the Wordy Girls in the Brevity blog. There are 3 of us, and we get together about once a month, and we share work, and we do retreats in the desert. Luckily, 2 of my friends, I don't have one, but they both have houses in the desert. So we typically spend about a week in the desert in the spring and a week in the desert in the fall. And we just write together. And a few years back, we had this big idea that we were going to teach workshops and do manuscript evaluation and take over the world in the writing world. And we did start, we had a number of workshops, and our big idea was to start like a camp for underprivileged girls, like who couldn't maybe afford to go to a writing camp. And we wanted to use the proceeds to create this camp in Lake Tahoe, where we live. And just as we were getting going, most of our parents started getting older and ill and dying. And, two of us had to take care of our parents full time. So that got kind of put on the back burner. But I am hoping that, post-COVID world, we'll be able to bring it back and bring back some workshops and things like that. And I would love to at some point do a camp for little girls who want to be writers.
Oh, that's cool. I love this idea of writing in community, not just a writing group where it's like you write on your own and then you submit your things and you workshop your pieces or talk about your pieces, but an actual situation where you're just sitting there among people writing as if you're, I don't know, it's like homeroom, and it's, and you're just, all right, putting our heads down and we're writing. We'll probably talk about this later, but right now let's all put our heads down together and do some work.
It's wonderful. It's like why people go to yoga, right? You could do your own yoga practice at home alone, but the energy of having everybody in the room, even if you're not looking at anybody else, it helps your practice. And so that helps your practice of writing. I just rented a haunted house in Virginia City, Nevada, which is this like old cowboy town, about 2 weeks ago, and invited 15 women to this art center. It's like this huge haunted mansion. And we all wrote in our bedrooms all day long, got together at night, and were able to, have a glass of wine and laugh and share food. And we had a little reading, and it was especially, we're all vaccinated, so we were able to do this safely. It was just wonderful. It was just so wonderful. I finished my book there, my next book, and set it off. So it's wonderful.
And I love what we're really talking about here, and you've said it a couple of times already, is this idea of community. And this game can sometimes get very competitive and toxically jealous, fraught with envy, if you will. And I love hearing you talk about community and how uplifting that can be. So in what ways has community been a good shield for you against a lot of those toxic feelings that can sometimes bleed in to the writer?
It's been everything, it has been everything. And I tell my students all the time that jealousy doesn't serve you. I feel really lucky. I felt jealous of certain things, but not writing. Like, I know that's normal. Most people feel some jealousy when they see their friends or colleagues or whatever getting big awards or getting great publishing deals. But for some reason, for some really lucky reason, I don't feel that. I don't feel jealous. I feel really glad. And that could even be self-serving, right? Like if my good friend gets the Guggenheim, well, then she can recommend me for a Guggenheim, right? So it's like we can all help each other. And, everybody's work is their own work. And, there are times I read, brilliant books and I think, oh my, why am I even trying? But then I think, I can't write this other person's book and they can't write my book. And I think just knowing that, that your true friends are out there doing it too, and their wins are your wins. My students' wins are my wins. And so I wish that was true for everybody. And I see that it's not, I see that, that people get sort of jealous or upset when other people win or publish things. And I almost don't understand it. Especially if they're their friends. If they're their friends, it's like, you should be happy for your friend. And if you're not, maybe you should go to therapy, because if you are truly friends with someone, you will be happy, even if they got something you wanted.
So when you're starting to formulate what would eventually become Bad Tourist, were you just in the mode of writing, just writing various travel essays, and then you're like, oh, there's a snowball building here?
No, I wish that's how it went. That would have been a lot faster. No, I'm a very slow writer, and I'm a terrible travel writer. So despite what anyone will tell you, those things are both true. It seems like I've had a lot of things coming out lately, but I've been working on them for so many years. So I started writing a memoir that was sort of about men and travel. I think it was called Between Men and Countries, something like that. So I was writing this memoir, and my mom kept sneaking into it. So then it was about how I didn't want to become like my mother, and the ways in which I interact with men was inherited from her. She was a beauty queen. And so, the male gaze was really important to her. So it was a memoir about that. And I was working with an agent at the time who just wanted more of my mom. She's a really interesting character. She shows up a little bit in Bad Tourist. And then I realized that's not where I wanted the book to go. So I actually took my mom out of it completely. And I broke up with that agent because she and I didn't have the same vision for the book. And as I was working on that memoir, I kept realizing that these little sort of vignettes were popping up that all were about being a bad tourist, and about how to be a better tourist, and how to be a person of privilege who travels through the world and recognizes her blind spots, and doesn't fall into the sort of pitfalls of bad tourism. And I kept pulling them out and put them in a folder, and I just called the folder Bad Tourist. I'd never thought I would have a book called Bad Tourist. And then I went into that folder one day, and I realized there were like 100,000 words in there. And so I switched gears because that other book wasn't working. Plus, at that time, my mom got sick. So then I started writing a book about taking care of her when she was dying of cancer, which is the book I'm working on right now. I just was like, oh, let me just see if I can organize this. These are these essays, and a lot of them had been sent out. A lot of them had been published as little short pieces. And I organized it. And then I thought, this is kind of an anti-guidebook, like what not to do. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if I organized it like a Lonely Planet? So I ended up putting the, Lonely Planet sites, sleeping and eating, all those, festivals, categories. And I realized the book was already almost in perfect order. So that's when I realized it was a book. I thought, oh my gosh, this is a book because it's already organized in this sort of arc of self-discovery, but also worked with the Lonely Planet guide. So then I started revising from there. So it took me many, many years to write Bad Tourist. The very first essay I wrote in it happens in the middle of the book now. And that was actually at the beginning of the memoir. And it was the scene of the avalanche where we set off an avalanche, and that's when I know I want to leave my first husband. And that took place in 2002. So that just gives you a sense of this is a book that's been 20 years in the making.
Right. Yeah, that's I love hearing that. And I love that it is something, like you said, that has been 20 years in the making, which is really gets to the heart of how patient you have to be sometimes for something to come together. Is that something that's kind of come easy to you as a writer, to be patient and to wait out a story?
It didn't come easy to me early on, but it does now. And I think it's because I've had so many times where I've thought, this is never going to come together. I don't know what this is really about. And what I've learned is the only way to find out what something is about to write through it. So, I have so many friends who sell their nonfiction books on proposal, which is great. It's a great way to do it, right? You get an advance, you get to write the book. You get the sort of win from the universe that this is a book that maybe somebody will want to read. I have never, ever thought that would be a good idea for myself, because I don't know what the book is about until I write through it. And so if I proposed a book, it would end up being an entirely different book by the end. Yeah,
exactly. Like that's especially true, I think, for a personal essay and memoir. Things that might take a certain, if it's more journalistic, it might make more sense to do that.
Yeah.
The more the book proposal route. But I totally hear you with something that feels a bit more novelistic. Mm-hmm. That it does feel better to wade through the mud of that to try to get through it and really flesh out its heart, its beating heart.
Yeah, no, you're right about the journalistic. I have a good friend whose book is coming out next year. It's called Trailed, Catherine Miles, and it's about the murders just off the Appalachian Trail. The two young women who were murdered about 20 years ago. Maybe it's 30 years now, a long time ago. And she needed to sell that on proposal in order to get the right interviews, right? For the FBI and all of those things. And so for her, it made perfect sense. She knew what the book was going to be about. It was going to be a sort of a deep dive into this unsolved murder. That makes sense. And I don't write those kinds of books, at least right now, I don't. So for me, I just write it and then see if anybody wants it, which is why I said I'm a terrible travel writer, right? Because I write it and then see if it will sell rather than, proposing it and then writing it.
What was that moment like when you effectively had to break up with your agent? Given that that finding an agent that wants to represent your work is so hard in the first place, and then you had to actually break ties because you didn't sort of share the same vision. What was that moment like for you?
Well, I couldn't do what she was asking me to do in the book. And I kept trying, and it was okay. I spent a lot of time trying to make it more what she wanted. And the fact that she wanted the book about my mom has given me a lot of confidence in this next book that I'm just starting, to draft, about taking care of my mom when she was dying. And I know that she was thinking in a very commercial way. And I was thinking in more of like, what is the book telling me it wants to be? Okay. And that's not right. That's sometimes opposite to the marketplace. I don't know that I broke up with her. We just sort of, we sort of walked different paths and in different directions. And in this next book, the mom book, who's to say now that I've written what she was looking for that I won't contact her and say, hey, there's no hard feelings or no, I didn't go get another agent. I don't have an agent right now. Yeah. And so it was more just like, I can't make this book into what you want it to be for the marketplace. So I'm just going to, do my thing. And, I hope you're having a great time in New York or whatever. Right.
Right. One of my favorite essays in the piece was Bellagio people, and about you being with this the family of a boyfriend and just not feeling like you were amongst them. It was kind of weird. You're traveling internationally through much of this book, and here you were feeling like a tourist and almost like an intruder in a different culture, but in the United States, just with someone else's family. It really struck a chord with me.
Oh my God, I love that description. I'm going to use that. That essay in some ways feels silly. It's one of the only essays in the second person, and it's, yeah. I really tried to push the humor on it because I was very, very uncomfortable, and I needed an essay that sort of showed. Because I have the essay where I, get together with that boyfriend in Mexico, and I have, a couple essays about him, and I need to show sort of what the other side of the, the romance part, was. And it was so indicative, I think, of the way in which relationships are, that in some ways they are like a real fairy tale, and in other ways they're just awful because the person comes with maybe an awful family. So I'm so glad you liked that one.
And you alluded to at the start of our conversation about how some people were frustrated by the structure or the anti-chronology of Bad Taurus. So maybe you can just speak a little to that, about just letting it play out more thematically instead of temporally linear, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a reader who doesn't mind working a little bit harder will really enjoy that it's not in chronological order. I mean, when you think about your favorite Netflix series, right? You see the story and then you flash back, right? They flash back into one character's earlier life. And so then all of a sudden you're in the past, right? So it's not in chronology. If it's done well and it's clear when you're in the past and when you're in the present, then it's really satisfying. Of course, it's easier, right, in a series because the actress looks younger or has a different hairdo, or, you can tell when you are in fact in the past. So I had to work really hard one of the things I did, which was, made it easier, is I timestamped every essay so that people could say, oh, this is 2002, this is really early. And for me, I think that, that this sort of idea of a woman who is sort of finding her own agency, right? Who is learning how to be subject in her life rather than object, and who is realizing, right, that, that travel not only changes her, but like how do her travels affect the world? And in realizing that makes her a more aware person. So I don't think self-growth happens in a chronological way, So there are times, right, that I learned something really important, and then I went back, right, and became sort of the person who did the, ignorant thing, or the person who really wanted to attract the attention of, male suitors or whatever. And so I tried to create an arc that shows self-growth in a number of different ways, and that self-growth didn't happen in chronological order per se.
Yeah, it's nice to see that it's not a polished or clean process of personal growth. That it is. It can be 2 steps forward, 1 back. It can be 1 step forward, 5 steps back. But overall, there is forward progress. It's just not as clean as maybe a self-help book might iron out for you.
Exactly.
And I love this idea that you said of learning to be, more, subject over object, and which really harkens to what you were saying about the male gaze and how you inherited that mindset or that want from your mother. So in a sense, it's probably something you never quite outgrow or let go of because it's so baked into your DNA. But how have you been able to cope from that and maybe get out from that shadow?
Yeah, it was such an important part of my upbringing. And I think the upbringing of girls and women now even,
Yeah.
and we're doing better as a society, right? Like, not telling little girls how pretty they are and little boys how smart they are, right? Like we tell them both, like you're kind, you're generous, you're smart, like the things that really are important. But especially I grew up in the 70s when that, it was the most important thing was being like cute and quiet and not taking up too much space and making sure people liked me and that boys liked me. And that my mother, that was her survival mechanism. Like she grew up super poor in Northern England, and, she relied on the attention and the monetary means of older men in order to escape, and she moved here to California in, 1967 or 68, something like that, before I was born. But I watched her, and, as a little girl, I wanted to be just like her because that's what we, how we are as little girls. And then as I got to be a teenager, we were sort of like best friends. So we had this boundaryless relationship. And then as I got older, I really realized I didn't want to be that way. I didn't want to be like her. And it caused a lot of difficulty in our relationship, which I'm writing about now. I had to really come to terms with it. I mean, I, went to therapy and I wrote about it, and I've written, a couple of books that include these sort of issues. And I think too, just getting older, there is something freeing about being older, and it is true, and it shouldn't be true that older women start to disappear, but you do disappear in those ways, and it does give you freedom. And I think that has, it's just been a natural process through aging in some respects.
And in this conversation, you've alluded to that you don't identify as a good travel writer. And I wonder why that is.
Well, I, like I said, if someone, and people, there are magazines and things that have said, please go write an essay about, a road trip along Highway 50. And I've done it, because it pays pretty well, better than, long form place-based narrative nonfiction. The voice should be the voice of the publication, right? In that kind of travel writing, and it should be in the second person, right? Like, lace up your shoes and hike down the trail and, jump in your
Yeah.
car and whatever you're writing about. And I'm resistant to that kind of writing because I really like to just, reflect on things. And I like to reveal my own mind and my own process of thinking. So I don't make that a good travel writer in that way, though I will say it's a good exercise to be able to manipulate your own voice to be the voice of a publication rather than your own voice. So I think it's a great assignment. And when I teach travel writing, I mostly teach the kind of travel writing I like to do, the sort of long form narrative, but I make the students do a service piece because I think it's good practice. And I think if they're looking for ways to fund their other kinds of travel writing, that is a way to do it.
And sometimes if you're at a party and you invariably run into somebody who's well traveled, and most often, at least with my interactions, they come across as being like pretty douchey, and and I wonder, as someone who's put a lot of miles, has a lot of airline miles and a lot of miles on her tires, like how can you talk about travel without sounding like that guy?
I've been in the room with that guy and that gal, so I know exactly what you mean. And maybe I'm not careful enough not to be that person. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And maybe I haven't, I know exactly what you mean. And I think that there's maybe it just comes down to the person at the dinner party who never asks anybody else any other questions. So,
Yeah, yeah.
so maybe, if I'm talking about traveling in India, rather than going on and, telling story after story about my experience, maybe asking the person like, well, where have you been that has been really inspirational or informative or has changed you, or where do you want to go? And I think asking questions stops you from being that person, because I don't need to brag about where I've gone because I write about it. I don't need to do both.
Yeah, and that's a great point. You can always tell. What's her name? Jimena Bengoechea. She wrote a great book, "Listen Like You Mean It," and it came out a couple months ago. And it's a really great book about just empathic listening and really getting to the heart of what people are, trying to talk about by asking the right questions. And you definitely get a sense that there are certain people out there that are more drains than energy givers in a conversation dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be that a person who is very proud about how well traveled they are, and if they're not asking the kind of questions, they're not reflecting back any questions, all they're doing is being a vampire in a sense, because all they're doing is sharing their stories, but not really giving anything back to the conversation. Maybe that's what it's all about, is to be like, all right, let's look outward instead of me showing you the trophies of my life.
Well, and to do that, I mean, right there, you're just not aware of the extreme privilege you have. Like,
yeah,
the extreme privilege connected to travel. I mean, most of the people in the world cannot travel, and the places that we want to go, right, are places where people, don't have the means to even visit places in their own country. And so I think that the idea of realizing that will give you enough humility to maybe not brag at that next dinner party.
And I like that you have a degree in biology. I studied biology too, and I was set to graduate. I was 3 weeks shy of graduation. I ended up adding journalism and staying an extra year because that was more in my. I wanted to be a writer versus someone tucked behind a microscope. So I just wanted to get a sense of how why you were in biology, and maybe why you pivoted from it.
Well, as I mentioned, my dad was a writer, and again, I had a complicated relationship with both parents. My dad was also an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And so, like all children who grow up with alcoholics, you're living in really shaky ground, right? You don't know if you're going to have like happy daddy who wants to take you for ice cream cone, or you're going to have yelling daddy, right, who's angry because you're disrupting his nap or whatever it is. And so I didn't want to become my father, just like I didn't want to become my mother. And of course I've become both of them. And now that they're both gone, I realize I did want to become them, just different versions of them, or my version of them.
Yeah.
And so when I was set to go off to college, I wanted to choose a major that was like as far away from that as possible, knowing that I still wanted to be a writer, but also thinking, well, I can go be a park ranger and a writer, or I want to work outside, or, I really am interested in the way the human body works. And I thought maybe I'll be a doctor, a sports medicine doctor. I really like sports. But then, of course, I realized all the things about me, right? I'm terrible at math, and I don't like the sight of blood, and, I'm messy. I mean, I think I had the record for breaking the most lab beakers, like in my physics and chemistry classes, like in the history of the school. It was hundreds of dollars I had to pay back before I could get my transcripts. And so I was a terrible scientist. I mean, most of the things I do, frankly, I'm not that good at. But it doesn't stop me, which I guess is a good thing. And so by the last quarter, we were on the quarter system at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo. I was like, I got to go to grad school and be a writer or a teacher. So I started taking creative writing classes, and I took a women in lit class. I took a fiction writing class, and I did end up going back and doing my MA in fiction writing a year later at Cal Poly, and then went on to do my PhD in literature. I love to write about the natural world. I'm super curious. So I like the fact that I have a biology degree, and I can still key out plants and animals, and, make sure that the right plant is in the right place in my, in my books and things like that. So it has served me for sure.
Oh, absolutely. It gives you a great sense of, biodiversity, and especially just biology as a whole, because there's the biochemical aspect of things where you can dig into, Krebs cycle, anaerobic stuff, organic chemistry, Fischer esterification, whatever it is. And, but then there's also the cool animal behavior stuff. When I swear some of the stuff I remember most is from this upper level ornithology course I took, and I didn't get a particularly good grade, but I can hear bird song, and I know bird behaviors, and I can pish and get birds to come out of the bushes and kind of cool. And pose there for me. And that all came from that class that dropped my GPA a bit, but it certainly served me in life a little more.
Yeah. No, I still walk by insects, and I'm like, oh, and I can name the scientific name, and people who I'm hiking with are thinking, where'd you pull that out of?
Yeah. We had to memorize a bunch of, orders and families in the songbird kingdom. So in the passerines. And so I even, when I see starlings, I know they're in the Mimidae family, which is the mimics, and among other birds. I don't know why those things stuck with me, but it's clearly it meant something to have that kind of connection to the natural world, and just the cool freaks of nature that are out there just beyond our window.
Yeah. Is the scientific name for starling Apis apis? Is that right?
Oh, you might be on. I'm going to look that up. As
okay. I don't know where that came in. I mean, my brain, I wonder where these things are held, but, so things just pop out sometimes that I don't know if they're right or not.
Let's see. I think the starling we're talking about, is a European starling. So let me.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about a European starling too. The
European starling, Latin name. This makes for great audio. But that's what the edit button's for. Looks like Sturnus vulgaris. That's going to be species name. Let's see if we can back up its Linnaean classification here. Also riveting audio.
Oh,
content.
I'm sorry. It's a common swift. I looked it up.
Oh, okay.
So Apis apis is a common swift, not a starling. Different bird, but at least it's a bird. At least I wasn't making it up.
Exactly. Yeah, about the same size. They're probably
yeah, common swift.
Fantastic. Nice. And listen, I want to be mindful of your time, Suzanne. And as I kind of bring this conversation to somewhat of a close, I forgot to prime the pump for you on this one. And if it catches you a little flat footed, that's fine. We can pivot to something else. But I've been liking ending these conversations by asking the guests for a recommendation of any kind. And that can be a book or a brand of coffee or a new pair of socks. And I've just been really liking asking guests for that kind of recommendation for the listeners out there to see what you might suggest or what you might recommend for the listeners out there.
What would I recommend? Of course, my go-to would be a book, but that seems too easy. During the pandemic, my husband and I both got new mountain bikes, which
Nice.
we love. And so I am going to recommend, if anybody is really into mountain biking, that they should get a Pivot. They're expensive, but they're really good. And beware that, I did break my arm really badly on that Pivot last year, but it wasn't the bike's fault. It was the user. So can I recommend a mountain bike? Is that a weird thing to recommend?
It's not at all. I love the more things that are almost divorced from literature as possible as recommendations.
I can also recommend skis. Okay. How about that? A summer recommendation and a winter recommendation.
Yeah.
So Moment skis are amazing. They are made in Sparks, Nevada, so very close. And in fact, full disclosure, my friend's son makes them, but they're a really great company. And I ski on Moments, and my husband does too. And for a long time, my husband could not keep up with me until I got him a pair of Moments. So I always say that Moments saved our marriage.
that's really a kind of a perfect turn of phrase too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What I love about what you're saying too with this recommendation is that they're very physical things, and like you said, like you would go on walks, and even when you're not at your desk, sometimes those are the most furtive moments of writing. So doing these physical things is very much a part of being connected to the world, but also being an artist.
It is. And I think you have to go outside and do things, or you're not going to have anything to write about.
Yeah. I heard Whitney Cummings, the comedian, talk about, if art is supposed to imitate life, you have to have a life. So it's like, this is the kind of stuff that you're going to have really cool interactions by putting yourself out in contact with people, with in touch with the world. And by doing so, it's like, okay, the notebook will fill up, and, you might be able to imbue some meaning on a certain experience, or maybe not. Either way, it's fun.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I think that's something the pandemic taught me. This is the longest I've been without international travel for, my whole adult life. And I've actually been able to kind of catch up on my stories. So like I had all these stories I wanted to write. And because of the pandemic, I've been able to sort of catch up on it because I've been staying home and I'm not refilling my life with stories and things I want to write about. I'm sitting and I'm writing. But now it's time, I've written stories I need to write. It's time for me to go out in the world again. But I think for the future, even if we don't have more pandemics, which knock on wood, I hope we don't, but we might. I think that's something I'm going to incorporate into my life, like a break, like a 6-month break from adventure every once in a while so that I can catch up with the writing.
Yeah, I love that seasonal approach to things too. And, we've been kind of talking in and out of sports too. Like there's never just one full season. Like there's regular season, then there's postseason, but then there's off season where you let the crops go fallow, but you're working on skills to when the season starts up again, you're ready with a new set of skills and some training and some time away from the grind of it all. And I think it's a great way to think about it, to take those times away. It doesn't mean you're not working. It just means you're recharging the batteries in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Nice. Well, Suzanne, where can people get more familiar with your work, find you online, social media, website, all that stuff?
I have a website. It's just my name, SuzanneRoberts.net. And I'm on Facebook. And I'm also on Instagram, and it's Suzanne Roberts 28. And I do have Twitter, but I hardly ever use it because Twitter scares me a little bit. So I check it like once a month. So that's not a really great place to find me. So I would say my website and Instagram, if you want to follow along on my van adventures. This summer, I'm going to be living out of my van. So I'll be posting pictures on Instagram.
Fantastic. Well, you'll be twitching the fibers of my envy with the van travel. So, not.
Well, I'll try to also keep it real and show, all the times that we're being towed, and because it's a 1999 van, it's very old, and all the times that we're broken down, and all the times that it's like buggy and hot, and we don't have air conditioning. So I'll keep it real too, so there won't be too much jealousy.
Fantastic. Well, Suzanne, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast, and of course, thanks for the work.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. It was fun.
Oh boy. Well, thanks to Suzanne Roberts for the time. That was a good chat. I had a fun time talking to her there. Let's check in on her van trip. I have many VW van stickers, so I live vicariously through my stickers. What a life. Check out her book, Bad Tourist. Fun read. And anti-chronology. Kind of like it. Anti-guidebook. It's good stuff. Check it out. So thanks for listening, CNFers. Thanks for the support as always. Thanks to WVWC, that's West Virginia Wesleyan College's MFA in Creative Writing, as well as Hippocamp 2021 for the support. And thanks for being along for the ride, CNFers. And I haven't been doing much of an extended riff of late. Part of that is mood. I've been in a titanically lousy mood for several weeks now, and part of that is respect for your time, of course, I can't imagine this is the only podcast you listen to. You probably listen to a dozen, maybe more. And who am I to take time away from you and those other podcasts, even if they might not be as good? Then I think many of you who listen to this show, you can get a decent interview anywhere, right? Sure, I have a certain style and skill, whatever. But ultimately, what makes you loyal to a show is the weirdness of the host and any cosmic congruency you feel with him or her or them. My riffs, for what it's worth, you're not going to find those elsewhere, and when I put them at the end of the show, you can at least elect to listen to it, or you can skip it. You're not being force-fed the cod oil of my riffs. You can choose to take that on your own time and dime, but it's there if you like a cherry on top. It's your salad with the dressing on the side. Take it or leave it. And if I don't do a riff, then what separates this show from myriad other punks out there? I've come to love Mark Maron's opening monologues. I used to not like them that much, but then they really grew on me a few years ago at this point. And where else can you find those opening monologues than on WTF with him? It is unique to him and his show. And so that's part of the weirdness that you tune into. See, look what happened. I didn't even mean for a riff to happen. God damn it, CNFers. I know one thing you won't hear anywhere else. If you can't do, interview. See ya.